Welcome back to Philosophy 115, Critical Thinking at the University at Buffalo. I'm your instructor, James Beebe. In this video lecture, I want to introduce the material on conspiracy theories that we're going to discuss. We're going to go through this book by Qasim Qassam called Conspiracy Theories over the next 4 weeks or so. And what I wanted to do is provide background to the book, like to set up the book, the issues in the book, the importance of the issues in the book, and relate them to what we've been doing in critical thinking. Relate them to the things we're trying to do as we are trying to learn to reason better and distinguish better and worse ways of reasoning. So the most important thing I thought that I could do in a background or a stage setting video lecture like this is to talk about listening to experts and when it's okay to maybe not listen to them, when it's obligatory, rational, fully rational to heed what they say, and when it's rational or permissible to reject what they have to say. Now, the reason why I want to focus on listening or not listening to experts in this is because, as we'll see as I go through my presentation here, and as we get into the conspiracy theory book, we'll see that conspiracies by their very nature ask you to dismiss the received opinion of the world's experts on some topic and to listen to somebody else who's not part of the majority consensus. They're an outsider in some sense, and they're the ones who allegedly really know the truth. So conspiracies, by their very nature, involve rejecting a vast consensus of expert opinion. And so we just need to think about just listening or not listening to expert opinion first without having conspiracy theories in the picture. And then by the very end of my video lecture presentation, I'll show what function it serves for some people to have conspiracy theories introduced into the equation. There's an important function they play, I will argue. So what I want to begin with is just by taking our recent discussion of John Locke and David Hume, 17th and 18th century philosophers, about rational belief, and just build on this. I want to sort of base my current discussion on that past discussion. So in the current discussion, we talked about their dictum that you should proportion your degree of belief to the amount and strength of the evidence available. And if you believe more strongly than your evidence really gives you a right to, well, that's not rational. Or if you believe less strongly than your evidence really suggests, that's irrational too. You should follow your evidence in how strongly or weakly you believe, or whether you believe at all. If your evidence is completely neutral, 50-50 on an issue, well, then you should be a complete agnostic about it. But that too is following your evidence wherever it leads. So Locke and Hume, in our earlier discussion, which occurred in the updating part of the course, focused on how our evidence should dictate what you believe. And what we're going to focus on here is just a very natural extension of that. We're going to focus in this video lecture presentation on how your evidence should guide you in who to believe. But it's really the very same thing. I mean, in both cases, it's you're following the evidence. What you believe is following the evidence. So it's really of a piece with what we did before. So here's our first case. I'm going to go through a bunch of different cases that have different features. So here's our first case. First case considers this claim. Higher blood pressure indicates greater risk of heart attack. So if your blood pressure is a little bit higher than the mean or median, then you have a little bit higher risk of heart attack. Or if it's a whole lot higher, then you have a greater risk of heart attack. A whole lot higher risk. So the question is, should you believe this claim? Should you be agnostic about this claim? Or should you think it's false? Now initially, you might have an opinion about it, or you may not know. Suppose you're largely uninformed. You really don't know one way or the other. And then suppose that I tell you, well, the American College of Cardiology says, yes, this is true. So this is a screenshot that I took just the other day. You'll notice this is a news source from just October 29th, just a few days ago. The title is The Association of Normal Systolic Blood Pressure with Cardiovascular Disease. And heart attacks as being part of cardiovascular disease. And they say, yes, there is. And you say, well, who the heck is the American College of Cardiology? And I say, well, it's an association that bestows medical credentials on cardiovascular specialists that meet a variety of qualifications. You can read more about it, the Wikipedia article here on this association, and on their own website at acc.org. Okay. So there are more than 54,000 cardiovascular specialists who belong to this association, and they are the nation's leading experts, okay, about cardiology. But in addition to the American College of Cardiology, there's also this guy, your loudmouthed Uncle Bob, who's not a physician, but has an opinion. He's never been to medical school. He's never been to college. He just says, nah, high blood pressure doesn't indicate a higher risk of heart attack. He just dismisses expert opinion. And the question for you is, who do you believe, the American College of Cardiology or your Uncle Bob? Now suppose that you decide to listen to Bob. Ask yourself how reasonable that is. I hope you will agree that it's entirely unreasonable. But I think you can probably think of a lot of situations where you know of people that do this. Could be yourself sometimes, by the way. When I ask, can you think of a time where someone has done this, people most always think of other people who do something like this. They dismiss strong, overwhelming consensus of experts in favor of the opinion of the one person who's up close to them. The experts are strangers to them. The person they listen to is friend, neighbor, family member, co-worker, boss, teacher, whatever. It's just one person, but it's an up-close person. So even though if I ask you, can you think of cases where people do things like this, even though the tendency is for us all to think of other people that do this, you should ask yourself when you may have done this, because we all do this. It's not just them, those other people, that do things like this. I think we all do to some degree. But again, I hope you will agree that in this case, it's not the right thing to do. So an expert is someone with specialized knowledge or expertise in some domain. There can be scientific experts, obviously, experts about medicine, experts about physics. There can be artistic experts, so experts who know a lot about art history or art techniques, people who have a lot of specialized experience with techniques of pottery or sculpting and working in various different kinds of media. Some people can be experts about sports trivia. Okay, you get the okay. So you get the idea. Someone is an expert when they have a kind of knowledge or experience that goes far beyond the normal. And there's overwhelming evidence that the American College of Cardiology is made up of people who pool their expertise. Each of these people is an expert about cardiology. They know a lot, and then pooling their expertise all together results in really a massive body of expert knowledge. And of course, there's no evidence of any kind that Bob has any such expertise. So Locke and Hume said, if you have evidence that P is true, you should believe that P is true. And if your evidence is strong, then you should believe strongly. And if your evidence is weak, then you should believe weakly. Okay? But although Locke and Hume didn't really talk about it, they would also agree to this natural extension of their principle. And this is if you don't have evidence about whether P is true or false. You might very well have or know where to look for evidence that someone else has evidence. And certainly in medicine, that's and other areas of science, that's what we do. We look for credentialed scientists to tell us what's what. We don't have evidence about cancer treatments, maybe, but we can obtain evidence about who would know what the evidence is about cancer treatments. Okay, and so we're just following an extension of Locke and Hume's dictum. Let's take another case, a very timely case. So we're in the middle of a pandemic, and medical experts are overwhelmingly in agreement that COVID-19 is more serious than the flu. Anthony Fauci certainly says so. The American Medical Association certainly says so. Editors-in-chief, editorial boards of the Journal of the American Medical Association, the New England Journal of Medicine, all the top infectious disease experts say this is true. Let's just focus on this one expert in particular, the guy who's in the news the most, Anthony Fauci. Well, who the heck is he? What does he know? I just want to run through some of his credentials. So he's been the director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases since 1984. So for 36 years, almost double the time that most of you have been alive, he's been the top infectious disease expert in America. He's been an advisor to every U.S. president since Ronald Reagan in the 1980s. He currently oversees $6 billion in research on a variety of infectious diseases, HIV, respiratory, diarrheal, tuberculosis, Ebola, Zika. Anthony Fauci is the 41st most highly cited researcher in all of human history in any field, taking into account researchers from any century. He's the 7th, his research is cited, as in his research gets listed in the works cited, the references list of other people's publications. He's the 7th most highly cited immunologist of the last half century, out of about 2 million or so, roughly, immunologists. He was awarded the highest civilian honor possible in the United States, the Presidential Medal of Freedom from George W. Bush. And he's got publications and honorary doctorates. So that's who Anthony Fauci is. But then there's talk radio hosts who don't have medical degrees. Most of the talk radio world is, of course, politically conservative. Some Joe Rogan type of guy. Joe Rogan has certainly downplayed the pandemic. I started to put him in here, but I couldn't, after a brief Google search, find that he, in fact, said this specific thing. He did say masks are for sissies. But in any case, some talk radio host, Joe Rogan or somebody like that, says, well, that's false. COVID-19 is not more serious than just the regular, ordinary seasonal flu. And maybe there's some other guy too, local or state politician, who says the same thing. And suppose you decide to go with Frank and George instead of Anthony. And of course, Anthony isn't just one guy, of course. He is giving voice to the overwhelming consensus opinion of millions of experts with the right training. Frank, George, Joe Rogan. They have no expertise in this area. But as you know from what's happened here in the year 2020, a lot of people go with Frank, George, and Joe, and people like that. And they dismiss the experts. And so this next example is in some ways more controversial than the first one that I gave about your loudmouth Uncle Bob and heart disease. It is controversial, more controversial, but it shouldn't be. It's the same thing. You just got overwhelming expert opinion on one side and guys with no expertise on some other side. And yes, I intentionally included all male names here. It's not just men, but it's overwhelmingly men on the side of the other side of the issue. And if it's radically unreasonable in the first case, it's radically unreasonable in the second. Now, as we're going to see, it's unreasonable to dismiss Anthony Fauci without a conspiracy theory added in. And as I'm building up to what conspiracy theories can do for you, I'm not actually suggesting that you rely on them. You shouldn't. But there is a function that they perform. They provide a way for you to dismiss Anthony and the other experts. This is bad, but it does provide this kind of function for people. So before I get all the way up to conspiracy theories, though, I want to consider some ways in which it's okay to dismiss expert consensus without bringing in a conspiracy theory. So in the examples I've chosen so far, as I've told the examples, it's not at all reasonable to dismiss the opinions of experts. But let's go through a couple of cases where it is okay. Okay, so these are cases where there's very strong evidence that there are some people are experts about something. Just call it X, as a fill in the blank. There's very strong evidence that they are experts and very strong evidence that you are not. They say that P is true about whatever subject X is, and you believe, or at least want to believe, otherwise. These three statements are not consistent. Okay, just look at them. There's very strong evidence that some people are experts about X and you're not, and the experts say one thing and you believe another. 1, 2, and 3 don't fit together. They don't fit together rationally. Unfortunately, they do go together in reality, but that's only because people are being irrational. But I'm going to add into some of these stories a number 4 some of the time. An additional piece of the story that can make it okay to dismiss experts. But there is going to need to be an additional part of the story. So let's consider a case of phantom limb pain. If you've never heard of it, this is a real thing. So some people who are amputees, who have had an arm or a leg amputated or something amputated, sometimes feel sensations that seem like they're in the amputated limb. So if suppose someone's left arm is amputated from the elbow down, sometimes they will still feel sensations in it feels like there's a sensation in their left hand. They don't have a left hand anymore. They don't have a left wrist. They don't have a left forearm that's been amputated. And some of the time the sensations can be quite painful. So this is a real thing. But I want to make my story a little bit hypothetical. So suppose that you have phantom limb pain, and there is, by the way, this actual group, another medical society called the American Academy of Pain Medicine. It's the group of medical practitioners and researchers who have the most knowledge about the nature and treatment of pain. Okay, so it's a real group. Phantom limb pain is real, but I want to make something that's not real to add to the story, and just play along. So here's the fictional part of my story. So suppose that it's the case that the American Academy of Pain Medicine has not yet heard of phantom limb pain. They have never encountered, let's suppose, for the sake of the story, they've never encountered a patient with reporting this kind of phenomenon before. Okay? So here's the situation. There is very strong evidence that the doctors who are part of this pain medicine association are experts about the nature, physiology, treatment of pain. There's very strong evidence. Of course, you're just a regular person. And suppose, according to my version of my story, they've never heard of such a thing, and when someone brings up the possibility, they say, that's crazy, you can't have pain in your left forearm if you don't have a left forearm. so that it's impossible for it to feel like it's in your left forearm if you don't have one. Suppose that's their official position. And they're not just saying this to be dogmatic. Suppose that they've just examined, thousands and thousands of patients, and they've just never encountered it in any of their cases. So they're basing this on evidence. They're not being, they're not being inappropriate or irrational. As far as all the evidence in their position is concerned, there's no such thing. And now suppose that you believe that phantom limb pain is possible. So notice how 1, 2, and 3 have the same structure as our previous cases about high blood pressure and heart attacks, and then the second case about Anthony Fauci and COVID-19. But there's one thing that makes this case, as I'm telling the story, differently. And that's this. You have information that the experts don't have. You have this personal experience of feeling sharp pain that seems like, for all the world, like it's coming from your left forearm and left hand, even though you know good and well you haven't had a left forearm and left hand for a number of years. Let's say. Okay. So the experts can tell you all they want that there's no such thing. They can tell you that all day long. They can bring out their credentials. I went through Anthony Fauci's credentials, and they can list all their credentials, and they can beat you over the head with them and tell you, look, buddy, you don't have any of these credentials. They can do that all day long, and yet 3 is the rational thing for you to believe in light of 4. Because of this very vivid personal experience you are having, an experience of pain, and an experience of pain that feels like it's coming from a left forelimb. Anyway, that experience justifies you, makes it totally rational for you to believe in 3. I think we could all agree. So the thing is, in this case is unlike the 2 previous cases of high blood pressure and heart attack in Anthony Fauci and COVID-19. This case is different from those because of number 4. You have evidence that the experts lack. There's no evidence about COVID-19 that you have that Anthony Fauci lacks. There is no such thing. Doesn't exist. Loudmouth Uncle Bob does not possess any special information about systolic blood pressure and its association with acute cardiac events. Dude's got nothing except a big mouth and a hard head and an opinion. That's all he's got. This case is different. So I just wanted to emphasize that if you in fact have some kind of information, evidence that the experts lack, there's nothing wrong with dismissing their opinion. So 1, 2, 3, and 4 here are very different than if you just had 1, 2, and 3. The 4 is absolutely essential. An additional thing to notice about this too is, in this case, you're still not an expert. And the people in the Pain Medicine Association are experts. And you should still think that they're experts. Okay, you have one piece of information that they lack. Okay, well, they have several million pieces of information that you lack. So they are still your intellectual superior. They're not your equal or your inferior when it comes to information about pain. Nevertheless, on this one issue, because you have one piece of information they lack, you can dismiss them about this one issue. You can't dismiss what they say about pain medicine in general, just across the board. You can't do that. You can't throw it all out. They're still the experts as far as you can tell, given your available evidence. So the reason why I threw in this final line, about you're still not an expert, is that sometimes if the circumstances are right, we can dismiss expert opinion without arrogantly claiming to be more expert than the experts ourselves. You're not arrogant. You don't need it. You're not setting yourself up as their equal or their superior. You're just saying, look, I know this one thing. I'm feeling phantom limb pain. I know this one thing. Okay? Let's go through another case that is somewhat similar to this, but also differs in at least one respect. This is going to be hypothetical as well. It's going to involve a medical society as well. I didn't really realize I would be using so many medical society examples in this presentation, but I think they work. So I just Googled the Guinness World Record for holding one's breath underwater, and it is 24 minutes, 3 seconds. Okay. Then I asked the Google, what sort of medical society is full of doctors that know the most about breathing, breath, blood oxygen levels, things like that. And it seems like this is the premier society, the American Thoracic Society. We help the world breathe. Now, suppose the following things are true. First of all, number one is true. There's very strong evidence that the physicians that are members of the American Thoracic Society are experts about breathing, and that you are not. And by the way, with each of these societies that I mentioned, it's not enough to go through medical school. You don't become a certified cardiologist just by completing the regular number of years of medical school and then a residency. You have to undergo additional training to receive this additional certification as having a specialization in some of these areas. Okay, so the people who are members of this American Thoracic Society have done all that. And you can find out about their degrees, and then you can also find out about their degree-granting institutions and their residencies and all sorts, and their publications, all sorts of stuff like that. Okay, strong evidence that they're experts about breathing matters and that you're not. And okay, the world record is 24 minutes for holding one's breath underwater. So suppose that they say, look, somebody may go to 25 minutes, maybe, with a little brain damage. Maybe 25 and a half, maybe 26. But there is no way someone is going to go for 35 minutes. That is physiologically impossible for any human to do that. Again, we're assuming there's not extra stuff. Like, yeah, this is like without the invention of some new drug, 20 years from now that radically alters the oxygen carrying capacity of your blood so that you could actually pull it off. They're saying without anything, special, as of yet uninvented new technologies, without anything like that, there's just no way any human of any kind could hold their breath underwater for 35 minutes. But now suppose the following is true. Suppose that you're going snorkeling somewhere, let's just say, I don't know, the Caribbean, and there's a pearl diver, a free diver, someone who dives without an oxygen tank. Suppose that you watch him and time him on your sports watch that is waterproof. You time him holding his breath for 35 minutes, okay? And I threw in the bit about snorkeling so that you could see what he's doing. You see that there's not some, secret oxygen tank, scuba tank that he's stashed behind the coral over there that he takes a breath from while he's underwater. No, you're watching him and you see with your own eyes this diver do this thing that's supposed to be impossible. So in this case, the question is it rational for you to dismiss the opinion of experts? And I think it is. You saw it with your own eyes. With the pain case, the phantom limb pain, where hypothetically the experts hadn't heard of that, you didn't see it with your own eyes, but you felt it from the inside. But in both cases, you have access to some information that the experts don't lack. And because of that, you can dismiss what they say. And again, just like in the last case, in dismissing what they say, you do not need to say that you are more expert about breathing than the experts about breathing. You don't need to do that. These thoracic specialists, pulmonary specialists, you can totally admit that they know tons of stuff about breathing and oxygen and how much oxygen cells need in the humans to continue surviving, carrying on their metabolic activity. You can still grant that they've got all the expertise in the world. Nevertheless, about this one issue, you have one piece of information they lack, and because that's the issue in question, it's okay to dismiss them. Okay, so anyways, a couple of cases like this. You have special information they lack. So let's look at another kind of case now. Let's look at a case where, again, you have information that's going to entitle you to dismiss expert testimony. But unlike the previous two cases, which had a lot of similarities with each other, it's not that you have seen something with your own eyes that they've never seen. Let's take a look at this other kind of case, which happens in the real world. So here's just an article from a few years ago. So there's a doctor who made his income totally as an expert witness in legal cases, legal trials. So the prosecution or the defense calls on an expert witness to testify about some matter, about the manner of death, about, I don't know, whatever it is. Wikipedia or Google, one of them tells me that the average hourly wage for this is $500 an hour. So you can find people, pay them $500 an hour, and they will testify in a court of law, either for the prosecution, for the defense, whatever it is. So here's a doctor in Florida who used to see patients, but stopped seeing patients. He realized that this expert witness gig was pretty cool, $500 an hour. So he testified in more than 300 cases, but then, and his evidence was accepted as authoritative. But then someone did some snooping, some investigating, and they found out that he lied about his credentials. He signed an official legal document saying that he was board certified in some area of expertise, when he was no such thing. He said he attended Johns Hopkins Medical School, which traditionally has been our nation's most prestigious medical school. Don't know if that's still true, but for basically throughout the 20th century, it was the #1 name. He lied about that. He said he was a member of the American Medical Association. He's not. He lied, saying he's still currently seeing patients. He's not. Now, when evidence comes to light like this, you can dismiss his testimony. So this is like the phantom limb case and the underwater breathing case, in that we have what's supposed to be an expert saying something, and you are totally rationally permitted to dismiss their evidence. But it's different from the phantom limb and breathing underwater case because of the particular kinds of reasons why it's okay for you to dismiss the expert testimony. In this particular case, there's strong initial evidence that this guy's an expert, but then there's subsequent evidence that shows the initial evidence was actually misleading. It was actually, in this case, it's just lies. Okay, so even though there's a little bit of difference here with why it's okay for you to reject expert testimony here compared to the two previous ones, there is something that's the same, and that's there's some additional piece of information, #4. If you just had the 1, 2, and 3, they, as we noted earlier, they just don't fit together coherently, sensibly, reasonably, rationally. They don't fit. But if you add in the right kind of additional information in the #4 slot, well, then things can very well change. And this is yet another situation in which things can change. So each of these last 3 cases, phantom limb pain, underwater breathing, and this legal expert testimony claim, in each case, it's totally rational for you to dismiss expert testimony. You're not setting yourself up as an expert. You don't need to bring in a conspiracy theory. The evidence that you have says, on this particular matter at hand, I shouldn't listen to the experts. I should believe something else than what this person says. There's one final case in this kind of category where it's okay, rationally permissible, to dismiss expert testimony. And that's where it's been discovered that there is no such thing as genuine expertise in that domain at all. So in the previous case, we had a medical doctor serving as an expert witness in legal cases. There really are medical doctors who have genuine expertise who can serve as authoritative, insightful, and very helpful expert witnesses in legal cases. So there really is the kind of expertise in question. It's just that this guy didn't have it. He was lying about his credentials. In the current case I have in mind, there are some people who claim to have expertise when there's no such thing. So this is I just put on here a documentary about the life of James Randi, who just died this past week. In the 1980s, he could have started in the 1970s as well. I'm not sure exactly when he came to national prominence. I think it may have been the 1970s as well. He's a magician, and he went around exposing people who claimed to have psychic powers. Yeah, he surely had to have started in the 70s. He went around exposing these people as frauds, and he just used his know-how as a magician to sort of just show the public, look, this is how you fool someone. You just do a little magic trick, and it seems like you've got superpowers. And you say you have superpowers, but you don't. So there are some people who claim to have psychic powers, which is a kind of expertise. And for a number of decades, the amazing Randi, as he was called, James Randi, was the premier debunker of psychic powers. And I think maybe I should actually think about saying, if you do some kind of assignment on this documentary, I'll give you some extra credit. Let me think about that for a little bit. That just occurred to me, and I think it's maybe not a bad idea. So I'll get back to you about that. But the idea is, if you have evidence that there's no such thing as expertise in the domain of expert psychic power, for example, there's no such thing as a medium, someone who has genuine expertise in talking to the spirits of the dead. So then again, you can dismiss the testimony of the alleged experts. Okay, so you can dismiss the testimony of experts if you have evidence they lack, or there's evidence showing that there's no expertise for this particular person, or no evidence in general. But if you don't have these additional kinds of evidences that the experts lack, or evidence that they're not in fact experts, if you don't have that, then there isn't a way for you to claim I am rational in dismissing the testimony of experts. There's all the evidence in the world that they're the experts and I'm not, but I'm not going to believe what they have to say. That just doesn't fit very well together. So now let's begin to start turning our attention to other kinds of ways that people want to try to dismiss expert testimony that don't involve these two categories here that I have summarized on this slide. They don't involve you possessing special information, unique information that the experts lack, and suppose also there's no evidence that they really lack expertise. What can you do? Well, what some people have done, unfortunately, is turn to conspiracy theories. If you're not going to bring in conspiracy theories, it's just really no contest between you and the experts in case after case. I mentioned Dr. Fauci and some talk radio show hosts. Here's a few others that I'll just briefly mention before turning to the next slide. The medical community as a whole is unanimous in saying vaccines do not cause autism. So we have the entire medical community on one side, and on the other side of the issue we have some mommy bloggers who say, I know that vaccines gave my son autism. Who do you believe? It's clear who you should believe. You should believe the medical community. And as we cover conspiracy theories here in this last part of the course, I really need to come up with an assignment that has you actually read the details about Andrew Wakefield and the intellectual fraud that he committed to try to start the whole anti-vax movement. So this guy there's just one guy who's the star of all this. He published a paper where he just lied, saying there was a link between vaccines and autism. He was accused of fraud, stripped of his credentials, fired, and then millions upon millions upon millions upon millions of dollars have followed up and shown that, in fact, there is in fact no connection of any kind between vaccines and autism. So the guy who first put the idea out there has been shown decisively to have committed intellectual and academic fraud. So who do you believe? A guy who in very public trials, the records of which are all publicly available, has been shown with publicly presented evidence to be a fraud. Do you listen to him and the mommy bloggers that like him? No. Similarly with global warming, there's no contest. You often hear the figure that 97% of climate scientists agree that rises in average global temperature for the last 150 years are anthropogenic. That's human in causation, but 97% is an underestimation. That just comes from one particular study by Noemi Oreskes, a very interesting historian of science. In the particular, in her sample, 97% agreed, but in other samples, subsequent studies that have tried to put a number on the climate consensus. I mean, it is 99.99999% of climate scientists. I've published in this area, by the way, myself. I've gathered data from leading climate scientists, climate policy experts, and the consensus is really overwhelming, and you have all the climate scientists lining up on one side, and on the other side are people who are not climate scientists. They are oil industry executives, conservative politicians being paid by the oil industry. There are a couple of people who have some scientific credentials lining up on their side, for money, of course. But the overwhelming consensus is on one side, and yet some people go against that. And it's just no contest without a conspiracy cover-up. And that's, of course, which we're about to turn our attention to is claims of cover-up, claims of conspiracy. Because without that, there's no contest. Similar for flat Earth theory. You got a couple NBA players on one side and some nutcases. On the other side, you have every pilot that's ever flown a plane and experienced the curvature of the Earth. Okay. So it's really no contest. So, the thing about conspiracy theories is they give you a kind of additional piece of information. So the conspiracy theorist, the thinking of the conspiracy theorist, is in agreement with what I've said about 1, 2, and 3. The conspiracy theorist is basically agreeing, yeah, 1, 2, and 3 don't fit. There's evidence that some people are experts and that I'm not. These experts say one thing, and I want to believe something else. The conspiracy theorist totally agrees. 1, 2, and 3 don't fit together. But the conspiracy theory notes from all the other cases that we've gone through that if you have the right additional piece of information, that can change the game. So what we're going to consider as we go into our conspiracy theory part of the course is a kind of number 4, an additional part of the story, the rest of the story. And it's going to be different than the ones we've considered before. With the phantom limb pain, there was evidence that you had that the experts had simply not ever come across before. It's just an honest mistake. There's no lying and hiding. As I told the hypothetical story, they just hadn't, come across it before. And this actually happens, Someone will have a rare disease that scientists haven't studied before. One of my children has a rare medical condition where his blood clots when he's exposed to prolonged exposure to cold temperatures. I took him to see a hematologist, a blood expert, who knew nothing about it. Okay, so someone can be an expert and just not know. The most frustrating medical appointment of my life. I had read every published article I could get my hand on this rare disorder. It's called, you ready for this? Cryofibrinogenemia. Very frustrating to talk to an expert who didn't know the first thing about it and wasn't interested in hearing. Anyway, in the phantom limb pain, the experts hadn't heard, but it was just a kind of honest kind of ignorance. They just hadn't come across it. And that's okay. Okay, but when you say that there is a conspiracy, that Big Pharma wants you to believe that vaccines are safe, but they know better. They're hiding the truth and lying about the safety of vaccines. They have evidence that says the vaccines are unsafe. They don't want the public to know. When you start saying something like that, you're moving in a very different direction from any of the cases I've discussed in the whole presentation so far. We're bringing in accusations of cover-up, accusations of lying, accusations of a concerted effort to keep things under wraps, some things hush, hush. And so that's what conspiracy theories are going to be. I wanted to go through all of this to sort of just note the kind of structure, the intellectual or argumentative structure, the thinking behind conspiracy theorizing. It involves recognizing that 1, 2, and 3 don't fit. There's got to be a number 4, and in this case, they're going to be attributing a conspiracy to some people. But notice how I wrote number 4. Number 4 isn't just the accusation that there's hiding of truth and lying. It's the claim that there's evidence. Okay? There's evidence of such a cover-up. The conspiracy theorist, in other words, feels the pull, the intellectual persuasiveness of Locke and Hume's dictum that you need to follow the evidence wherever it leads. And if you don't have evidence in pointing in a particular direction, you shouldn't believe that. They feel the pull of it. They don't deny that. They claim to have evidence so that they can claim to be believing and acting in accord with the idea that you should proportion your belief in accordance with evidence. It turns out, though, that with things that are called conspiracy theories, there really isn't good evidence of this sort of thing, and people want to believe it anyway. And this is a phenomenon that's really come to prominence in recent years, especially in the last 4 years, since 2016. But it's been around for a long time. It's intensified. It's become more. The appeal to conspiracy theories has been more prominent. We've never had someone in the White House appeal to and retweet conspiracy theorists as much as we do now. This is a new era, and that's why I thought it would be important to try to do some critical thinking about conspiracy theories here for the last part of our course. So the conspiracy theorist is going to owe us some kind of story, some kind of evidence, some kind of paper trail, some documentation that provides evidence of conspiracy. Since the experts say one thing, the theorist says the experts actually really know that P is not true. They say P, but they know it's not true. And they can provide some explanation about how some motivation involving profit, power, I don't know, evil intentions of some kind is responsible for them saying one thing when they know another. But it's not going to be enough to make the accusation. They've got to provide us with some reason. Otherwise, there's no point in adding in that number 4. We've been adding in number 4s to relieve a kind of tension, to reduce a kind of cognitive dissonance that we we would feel if we just had the 1, 2, and 3 that we keep putting on that I keep putting on these slides, where the experts say one thing and it's clear that they're experts and it's clear that you're not and you want to believe something else. And there is tension, there's cognitive dissonance, there's this feeling of unease that you will feel if you just have those three things together. Different kinds of number 4s, different kinds of additional pieces of information can relieve that tension. But again, only if there's good reason to suppose that those number 4s are for real. So we're going to turn our attention to some of these number 4s, these allegations of conspiracy and cover-ups that have been prominent in American history, recent American history, during the last half century in particular, and looking at some that are quite prevalent just in the last few years.